Hey everybody, it's Carm here, and you know who? Back on after at least a few videos of absence, and I think our other guy is napping, so at least we got one of them awake. He's been up actually a while, rather rambunctious, really since the middle of the night. But yeah, back on a Thursday, and wanted to share a few more revisits. A little more of a theme this time. I haven't done an ECM video in quite a while. I don't think I've done a few before, considering it's my favorite label. It's something I've always wanted to do more of them on, and someone is biting my hand very hard. Okay, enough. And yeah, I just wanted to share some ECMs, which I find, at least superficially, or maybe these, more encompassing ways, are rather incongruous for the label, at least as far as the stereotype of ECM being known for, they say there's a certain aesthetic with the sound and some of the style, maybe more chamber oriented, more formal. These definitely are not formal, and I've been enjoying them a lot lately, and I'll start right in. Terrier Ripdoll, the singles collection. This is from August of 1988, when it was recorded. Of course, if you know Thierry, he's a guitarist, composer, a multi-instrumentalist. He plays keyboards and flute and other things. On here, it's just electric guitar. He had a trio at the time, which was known as the Chasers Trio, with I'm not sure I'm pronouncing his name right, Bjorn Kjellmeyer on basses, and Auden Clive on drums. And this is the third of the three albums they did in the 80s, and they're joined on here by Alan Dangerfield, keyboards and synclavier, who throughout the album gets this kind of Hammond B3 sound, which I'm guessing was probably the synclavier, unless it's just not credited. But previous to this, well, if you know his history, Thierry, he'd gone through a lot of different styles, again more chamberish, sometimes jazzy, quite rock oriented. Years ago I used to say he was the kind of the rocker of ECM, which I don't know if this quite does him justice, because he's done so many different styles and oftentimes at once. Now on here though, he concentrates more in the rock vein, maybe more pop rock vein, and I think the singles collection as a title is maybe a little bit more of a pastiche, or just having some fun with that notion, kind of tongue-in-cheek, the idea of him making anything remotely like a top 40 hit. Although these songs have certain, you could say, hooks to them, which would lend themselves to that sort of thing. A lot of short, punchy tunes. Most were written by Thierry, but there's several written by Alan Dangerfield, which I find in some ways are the most fun of the album, and maybe the most cinematic. You do imagine like a movie from the time, maybe like a lighter crime drama in a way, or crime comedy in a way, something where you have the protagonist and the antagonist, and they're just kind of going at it, but there's there's that kind of adventure to the music, but it does have that cinematic quality. There's a lot of different guitar styles on here from him, on electric guitar, some going into almost kind of shredding territory, a lot of different rock styles, sometimes more distorted, other times more subtle and elegant, and maybe adding to the a little more atmospheric, which I think is what he's really known for, making very atmospheric music. What really stands out for me on here though is the bass playing of Bjorn. He's just credited with bass, though it sounds like he's playing a couple different electric basses, fretless and fretted, as well as upright bass, which I admire anyone, of course, who could play an instrument really well with great facility. He manages to play both, which are really two very different instruments. The bass guitar, of course, is part of the guitar family, and upright bass is a very large violin, stood up, and he plays them both with just great ease, going in between the two of them. and is given a lot of solo space on here. But it's a really fun album, really enjoyable. I've had it for a long time, and I'm sure I was puzzled the first time I heard it. Not quite expecting something like this from either him or the label, but it's just another example of in the '80s where I like that ECM tried a lot of different things with their artists, or maybe they signed other artists too for that very reason, wanting to go try something else outside of the usual scope. But great stuff here. Definitely, if you're a rock person, and and you don't mind it being instrumental too, so you're going to get in some ways like a straight rock album without the vocals. But again, there's other ingredients too that make it very worthwhile. Next up here, something I know I've definitely showed before, and I think I even featured it. There was a thread going around maybe a couple of years ago. Show one of the more obscure albums in your collection, which of course after showing it I learned it wasn't so obscure. I think several others mentioned having it. Lask, by an artist named Ulrich Lask. This is one of these covers always enjoyed over the years. Ulrich P. Lask on alto sax and synthesizer, Meinolf Bolschuti on drums, and Maggie Nichols on voice. Recorded in 1981, came out in '82. Now this is another approach that the label took at the time. Her vocals, she writes the lyrics for the most part, and Ulrich Lask composes the music. It goes between a lot of different styles. Again, various kinds of rock. Maybe some punk in there even, or a little bit of that influence. Synth pop, as well as other styles. I really wouldn't. Maybe even a little bit of lounge or music theater. As often as not, she sings or speaks the lyrics as well as sings them. Oftentimes there's a little story or a side going with them, which really makes it a lot of fun. There's a piece called Kidnapped, in which she is portraying someone who gets kidnapped by someone who wants to make strange and unusual music, and is kind of holding her captive and forcing her into this endeavor, which kind of tongue-in-cheek play on the whole project as a whole. But really a lot of fun. His saxophone playing goes between a lot of different styles, which would be hard to pin down. At times he plays in this really kind of rapid staccato style, and she often mimics it with almost like a scat, almost very very closely. Extraordinary technique, but really done well to tell a story. And again, the whole thing is it's so much fun. There's a lot of tongue-in-cheek, and you can tell it's not something that I think it's another stereotype about ECM is sometimes it's rather melancholy and maybe overly serious. And this definitely doesn't take itself too seriously, which is very refreshing. I'd imagine hearing it at the time would have really thrown someone off. If you're looking through the import bins, way back when, and you come across this, you're not getting what you'd get with Jan Garbarek or Keith Jarrett or a lot of others at the time. So really a lot of fun. If you like a different kind of a different potpourri, I'd say, of rock as well as music theater and improvisation, this is a real good thing to check out. And it's different from anything else the label's done that that I know of. So excellent stuff here. They did a second album too, at least one other album which I have around. I prefer this one myself. And finally here, first coming across this, well, of course I knew I had to get it for various reasons, but not least of all the lineup. The Epidemics from 1986. Now the cover, that would have been enough to draw one in, but the lineup on here is really, you wouldn't really imagine all of these people together. At least I wouldn't have at the time, and I've had this, at least 20 years. You have Shankar, if you know the violinist Shankar, I believe he's Indian. He played with John McLaughlin in Shakti back in the 70s. Yeah, he sings, plays 10-string double violin, synthesizer and drum machine. And then there's Caroline, who may have been his wife at the time. I'm not positive. Also on vocals, synthesizer and tambura. You have Steve Vai on guitar, Gilbert Kaufman on synthesizer, who I wasn't previously familiar with, and Percy Jones on bass, one of my all-time favorite bass players, all on the same record. Although I'd say this is probably more, I wouldn't like to say one-dimensional, but compared to the previous two albums, this is a much more concentrated style. You could say kind of a synth pop. Again, the incongruous combination of musicians, as well as the approaches. The lyrics, and there are lyrics on every song. Very, very pop rock, very. I don't know if I'd say pedestrian, but more. The subject is very kind of everyday. Not particularly. There's not a lot of metaphor in the songs. They kind of sing it straight out. Whatever. Like one of the lyrics, "Full moon." It's simply "full moon on a Friday. Watch out for the werewolf." I think is what it is. Now throughout this, again, it's very soundtrack like the singles collection. I imagine kind of a teen comedy of the time, of the mid 80s. Not like a John Hughes film though. It's more like maybe kind of like direct-to-video sort of thing, where you don't recognize anyone in the credits or on screen, which is not knocking this or those movies, which I actually prefer those kind of movies from the time, but it brings to mind that you imagine maybe even college kids, like a frat party type thing. They've taken over mom and dad's house, and it's a large palatial place, and they've taken over, and people are hanging out the windows and throwing things out, and you're cutting to different scenes of different situations, and all kinds of characters coming in and out. I kind of imagine that throughout this album at different times. Even notwithstanding the lyrics, just the tone of everything, the production and the drum machine, which is pretty present throughout. It's fascinating hearing his violin style played amidst all the the synthesizers and the drum machine. And, of course, Percy, who's one of my favorites. Hearing him in this context, with his kind of trademark, sort of bubbling, fretless bass, really an indefinable style. Very much his own technique. Hearing him within this framework is really fascinating. And Steve Vai's playing, if you know what he sounds like, he kind of, maybe it's a little more subdued, but every now and then he throws in a little bit of a solo. Maybe it's more there for effects and atmosphere in a way, but very it works. I know I've seen some people show this, and they panned it pretty hard, but I don't know. I have a certain affection for even things that sound like this, maybe from growing up during the time, and I don't know, just I don't know, it doesn't quite get old for me. It's not something I'd listen to all the time, but yeah, it brings me back in a sense. And again, hearing all these different ingredients and combinations on here, these different styles of the players, and the imagery it evokes. And again, it's probably not meant to be tongue-in-cheek, but it sounds, it has a quirky charm to it that it always brings me in when I hear it. So yeah, definitely not to everyone's persuasion, and I don't know if there is such a thing as an ECM purist, or someone who is really kind of locked into that stereotype of the label, but yeah, they probably wouldn't care for this quite as much. But it's worth a listen, just to hear what it's like, and hear yet another side of the label that it only came around every now and then back then, at that time. So yeah, The Epidemics by it's credited to Schenker and Caroline, but yeah, it's a lot of fun and quite different. So yeah, there's just 3 examples. Yeah, maybe I'll do maybe kind of an ongoing series as I come across these more, because I know I have other ones that, you know, probably fit into that, the mold of not fitting into the mold, so to speak, of the label. And yeah, I'll show it's playing in the background. I don't know how well it's coming through. Erik Michaelis, solo piano, Follow Your Heart. Just got this recently. I wanted to avoid playing an ECM in the background because I always seem to get in trouble from it. Either gets blocked or muted or something. But it's someone who I've enjoyed for a long time. It usually plays a combination of piano and synthesizers. It's just solo piano on here. He was on a label, I think, called Mood Tapes for some years, and I'd heard him way back then, you know, back in the early 90s. But, yeah, I enjoy his stuff a lot. So, that'll do it for now. Just, yeah, it's actually, this is a theme I had been thinking of doing for quite a while. You know, kind of against type ECMs, and yeah, find more to do along the way. And yeah, we'll see what comes up next. So from the director, who's just below here, I hope you're all doing well, and spring is still springing up. Well, to the next one. Peace, love, and joy.